Welcome back, listeners, to the Academy I3 podcast. We are joined today with wonderful guests to talk about culturally responsive services, a really amazing topic here today. We have wonderful guests to be able to really dive into more of that and have some really genuine conversations that we've talked over and we'll bring to you all today. So now let me turn it over to our guests to introduce themselves before we get started. So Wanjiru, if I can pitch it over to you first.
Thank you, Charlie. Hello, everybody. I'm Wanjiru Golly, and I'm the manager for Cultural Responsiveness Services. That's a program within the Academy for Professional Excellence. I use pronouns she, her, and I'm coming to you from Palm Desert, which is on the land of the Kahuya people. And I'll pass it over to Lisa.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Gilbert, and I am in San Diego. I'm a retired social worker. I've been training with the Academy for about 18 years now, and happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. And Roger.
Hello, everyone. My name is Roger De Leon Jr. I'm first and foremost a father with lived experience, as well as a father and a grandfather who's very active. And so my role today, having had coming out as a parent partner, I am an independent contracting consultant, as well as a trainer for the Academy for a number of years. And so that is my role. And just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being here today and for being able to really bring our audience some great conversations and great topics. So, Wanjiru, let me start with you to really set the foundation for us around culturally responsive services.
Yes, thank you again. So I'd like to start off by first giving you my definition of cultural responsiveness practice. That will really be the foundation of what we'll be talking about in our podcast. So cultural responsiveness practice, essentially, this is a lifelong journey in knowing your culture and how it impacts your understanding of other people's culture and way of life. By deepening our understanding of other people, we understand the reasons behind the choices they make and also recognize others as individuals and effectively communicate with them based on their individual needs. So I like to see this definition really as in three parts. There are three really important parts. The first one for me is really emphasizing the fact that this is a lifelong journey. We continue to learn about ourselves and our culture, right? We never come to a point where we are experts on ourselves because we're always in different situations, interactions with different people, and consistently doing our self-reflection and thinking about what those interactions mean for us, right? So we're consistently learning about our culture. So it's a lifelong journey. And by really understanding who we are, this also deepens our understanding of other people, because the cultural lens that we use to see the world is how we hear others. So that's the other important piece. Really, we in different situations, we could be in the same situation with another individual and we would interpret it in different ways. So that piece is also important, right? Because we're really using our cultural lens and our identity to understand the situation that we're in. And that part leads to why having knowledge and really focusing not only our own self-reflection and then also understanding others, that's what helps deepen our interactions with each other, right? And we have unique relationships with each other, unique understanding. So for me, cultural responsiveness really is those three pieces. It's the self-reflection, knowing our culture, and then also deepening how we understand others and really having more effective communication with each other. So with that definition, I'll just give a brief overview of the three academies that we have under cultural responsiveness services. So we have the cultural responsiveness academies, and these are essentially designed as learning experiences where we invite folks from all levels of the agency. We include our leadership folk, we include our support staff, and also the folks that are working directly with families and children to really come together in a space of learning together, thinking through their own cultural identity, and how they can, really learn to improve their interactions, not only with each other as colleagues, but also with the families that they serve. And so within these academies, as I mentioned, these are learning experiences. We really do move away from the term of training, because for me, training, gives the assumption that you're coming to be taught what to do. Whereas with the learning experience, this really is a relationship with the learners, the facilitators, to really critically think through having discussions, bringing one's own experiences, learning from each other, and really thinking through how this will impact their practice once they return to their workplace. So the learning experience really is a fluid relationship, and we definitely have that as the focus in our classrooms. So our academies are a 9-month experience. So it's taking time to step away from your work, do some critical thinking. We have classes that are spaced out once a month. And again, this is to provide the opportunity to come and learn, go back into your workspace, practice something that you've learned, and then bring it back into the classroom. We also include a simulation day, which is really a really important part of the series, where we give our learners the opportunity to actually practice that skill in real time, with actors and facilitators in place to help them, guide them through their practicing of their skills and discussions. And again, this is the extension of the learning in terms of bringing the theories and the thoughts into practice. We also include coaching. The coaching piece also enhances the learning experience, because our learners are able to have an opportunity to sit one-on-one with a coach to really think through what they've learned in the classroom and what does it mean specific to them. And that's, again, going back to the cultural responsiveness piece and self-reflecting and taking that time to do that piece. The other important part of the series is, anytime we're talking about practice change, there's the individual part, which is what I've spoken about, what we're doing in the classroom. And then there's also the organizational change. So how do we actually take what we've learned to actually shift policies and procedures? So with the series, the learners have an opportunity to work on a project. They can look at either one of their policies or procedures and really think through and unpack how can we make them more culturally responsive for the families and communities that we serve. And that's the extension of the individual growth and personal change, and then moving that into organizational change. We're all part of our organizations, and we make our policies and procedures, and they're only as good as what we bring into them as well. So really combining those two pieces is a really integral part of the program. So as you can see, as you go through the academies, if we're going back to the definition that I just shared, really the biggest pieces are the self-reflection. We always want to give space, our facilitators give space for our learners to really think through, what does this mean for you? And how is this going to impact others? So in our academies, the other piece, as I mentioned, this is a 9-month learning experience. And, when we're talking about the families and communities that we serve, we're really looking at what are the issues that are impacting our underserved families and communities specifically, and how can we shift practice for those folk? So in our series, we have currently focused on the African American population. We have done a series on our tribal partners and Native American families. Our fathers, we have a series on father engagement, and we also have a series on our LGBTQ plus communities. And so really spending time for each series, unpacking what specifically those issues are, not individually, right? What those communities mean for us, but also how do we shift the practice, our organizational practice for each of those communities. So it feels like an intense program. Anytime we're thinking about change takes time. As I mentioned before, this is a lifelong journey. Folks come, they spend the time. We have several learners that come back for all 4 of the series, continuing to learn. And this again goes back to the cultural responsiveness, right? We are not all monolithic, even though we talk about cultural responsiveness, we want to think for what does this mean for our fathers, specifically for our African American families and communities and our LGBTQ and our tribal partners, because they're all qualities that are unique for each of these populations that we want to make sure that we're able to unpack. Yeah, so that's it in a soundbite. And we have our 2 facilitators here. So with that, Charlie, I will hand it back over to you.
Excellent. Yeah, great. Thank you so much for setting that up for us. And I think what you also described too really highlights like where we're at right now to be able to shift and really embrace this work. Because I mean, I think, a lot of times even our listeners or our audience may have sort of seen the transition of how cultural responsiveness has come into play, whether it started off with cultural sensitivity, then cultural awareness, and now we're really stepping more into cultural responsiveness. And who better to be able to kind of share more about that with our than our facilitators and folks and guests today who have been part of that program. So I'd love to really start off with the first question, and let's go with you, Lisa, first. Like, how has participating in culturally responsive services supported your development personally and professionally?
Oh, good question. Wanjiru, well said, all of that. I was thinking to myself, man, we do a lot of good stuff. It's been really amazing. I mean, I'll have to say, I remember receiving a phone call from Wanjiru regarding the father engagement and really just the Cultural Responsiveness Academy and what that was going to be, and just being very excited, both excited and honored to be part of that kind of co-pilot, if you will, in the beginning of it all. And the journey for me has been amazing, both professionally and personally, and just that I too have lived experience in that I was in foster care and I grew up, I am biracial, half Black and half white, but I grew up in a single parent home with my mom being white. And so I didn't have really very little Black culture. And so for me, being part of this academy was, like, oh, you see me? I mean, that's, what that felt like for me as a woman of color, but also just being on this journey myself professionally that then continues in a space of learning. And so that's been really great for me to not only just share my experiences, both professionally, but also personally to some degree, right? Mostly professionally. I was a social worker that worked with lots of folks, different cultures, and also just to hear from the learners. And a lot of the times, what I find in those spaces is just a lot of folks have just coming to some realizations in that learning space where they ask questions about things they don't understand about other cultures, but at the same time, just being able to receive that as a learner and for people to kind of ask questions that may be uncomfortable and then facilitating those conversations with the group. So that's been pretty great. That's been pretty great.
Excellent. Thank you. What about you, Roger?
So a lot like what Lisa shared, I know that coming into child welfare as a parent partner, it was the first time that I learned about parent partner, which is, lived experience. I've navigated the system as a parent back in the day, but I didn't know it was actually a thing. And so, when you come into the role of a parent partner and you realize, wow, this is it. Not only did we just walk into it, but we walked into it blindly. And what I mean by that is the program wasn't even built yet. It was an idea. And so, you walk in there and you see there's a different side to child welfare and all that. And so as you're developing, not everything clicks. And so one of the things that I can say that really I can reflect back on, is not just as a facilitator, but becoming a learner. And when, just like Lisa shared, I got a call from Wanjiru. I was doing simulations and I was already in the role of parent partner. And we developed that, but there was just something that, I just wasn't too keen on. And when I was able to meet with Wanjiru on the father engagement, and I'm not sure if you remember this, Wanjiru, we had a lot of good conversations together. right? And so one of the things that I tried to do is I tried to approach any new opportunity, not just as an individual who can bring something to the table, but what could I learn? And I learned a lot. I learned about, this cultural responsiveness where it started to became more to life for me. And being able to see that really started to give me a little bit of an eye opener in my practice, not just as a facilitator, but in my job as well. And realizing, a lot of different things that were coming out and beginning to start making sense. And then even taking me back to my experience in the situations that I was at, and looking at things a little bit differently. And so I know I was able to bring a father's viewpoint in our father engagement piece. And we had some, moments, myself and Wanjiru, and in developing this father engagement curriculum. And so it really went and it went beyond that. It helped me to see the differences on practices, the differences on, when we talk about culture, realizing also that even myself as a Hispanic father, that I could not go to another Hispanic father and assume that we were the same. It could be a neighbor, right? And so it went beyond just, the facilitation, right? It went beyond just the job. It went to my everyday life and saying, wow, we could be possibly the same culture, but two different individuals. And that developed inside of me the ability to be able to individualize those who I was working with, both mom and dad in my work, but also just continuing to create this father engagement piece was a lot of eye-opening experiences of other individuals that I was able to. I worked a lot with the Spanish speaking community, as I was the only Spanish speaking male parent partner for all of Riverside County Children's Services. So with that, my perspectives began to change, and I really began to open up not just my learning experience when I was here with the academy, but also going into the homes and really seeing things. And so just a lot of the self-reflecting of things that I had missed, and the developmental state that I was beginning to be able to see things differently and bring to the table. And when I was able to speak on certain things, I was realizing, okay, so we really need to look at a lot of different things differently than the way we approach it. We talk about cultural responsiveness, but what exactly does that mean? And so as I was developing and beginning to catch on and learn a lot of different things, with my time here with the academy, and I continue to do so, I was able to take that back. Not to mention, even with other curriculums after this father engagement curriculum that I was a part of developing, taking it to the other curriculums that I'm a part of, even to this day, really bringing in that and what that would look like. And what it looks like is going and approaching in a way that I don't know everything. Even if I'm speaking to someone that may be of the same culture, we couldn't be two different individuals. And so really resonating that to others that, I was able to share with. And so I think also it really helped me to develop a self-value, really look at, the importance of, what I had to offer. Because, when you come into this type of work, in this line of work, in any which way, right, child welfare, whatever, you have this perspective on things. And unless you're willing to open up and grow and develop, we become narrow vision. And for an individual like myself who has this lived experience, it really doesn't resonate that there's value. And I think that in my journey, being able to develop and learn, especially with that cultural piece, that I was not just a voice for myself, but I was a voice for others, those that I've sat with, those that I, helped navigate, those that I've sat down with and heard. And I'm not just talking about families, I'm talking about social workers that sat with me and cried with me, right, of diverse, backgrounds and just all these things. It was more of an appreciation to understand and really to respect that, but also to bring to the table the importance of a continuance of how we're looking at those that come before us when we're talking for those in the agencies, whether it's social workers, supervisors, parent partners, youth partners, right? Just because we have lived experience does not mean that we don't have biases. And that was another big thing that really came out was, about what that looks like, right? So I know I'm sharing a lot, but it just starts to all come back and resonate. The development, that I was privileged to be a part of and still continuing to grow in. And, it's something that I'm very appreciative, Wanjiru, for that opportunity to be able to share space with you, have conversations as we were developing together and learn about, this whole different perspective. I don't know if you realize that, but it's kind of the beginning of my journey of doing what I was doing, not fully being a trainer yet and facilitator. So it's been some time. And then allowing that to just, resonate everywhere that I went and continue to develop in that. And so it really increased my awareness and my ability to be able to see things. And so, the list can go on and on about a lot of stuff that are still going. I know I'm probably missing some things, but I think as of right now for this one, I'm going to stop right there and go ahead and pass it back to you.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, the culture responsive services and the culture responsive academy is really special. It really provided a lot of space for self-reflection, a lot of space for self-honoring and self-valuing, as you mentioned. A follow-up question I really wanted to kind of bring to this space for you folks as well is and of course, share what you feel comfortable with, is how did you all move beyond just sort of that activation moment? You're now stepping into a space where you're working with the system that some of you have gone through this journey with that lived experience. And how did you move from that to more of a learning space, and then now to more of a facilitation space? So yeah, let me put that question out there, see who would like to share.
So I'll go ahead and start off. As I shared, I didn't know about parent partnering. I didn't know about any of these. When I went through my situation, or whatever we want to call it, there was not even a thought that I was going to come back, right, to the system that almost destroyed my life. That's the reality of it. And so I didn't understand, first and foremost, why I was going through it. My circumstances, it is what it is. But when I did come, one of the things that I was very intentional was I wanted to come in to learn the other side. I understood what it was like to be a parent that navigated, that felt those emotions, that trauma. That trauma does not go away. It doesn't go away. What we do is we learn to live with it, forgive, and move on to be able to help and use it in a different way. So coming in, my whole thing was, how am I supposed to help this agency, or what is it we're supposed to do? First of all, I didn't even know what the whole thing was, right? Because like I said, it was just an idea. There was nothing put together yet. It was an idea. You guys have lived experience. You'll be able to help other families. We're listening. So coming in, my first thing was, I want to come in and I want to learn. I want to learn how the system functions. I want to know how decisions are made. I want to know it, and I want to know it intentionally, not so much just, to see how I can dismantle it. That's not what the point was. It was, how do I help these parents to have something I didn't have? And so I think with that came this opportunity. So I came in already open and trying to remain open and teachable. And so what that did was, as I shared all these things that I got from it, as I was learning, sometimes I didn't understand certain things, but I let it play out. And what it did was it got me out of sometimes my safe zone and, comfort zone, and made me really think beyond, okay, so what is it that I'm missing in myself of continuing to grow and to develop? And so as a learner, I was able to take, a lot of these things in, and began to really just look at how I can, take it out and practice it, right? Because, I know that the best way of learning is to put it to practice. It's one thing if we sit there and we listen and we hear over and over, and there's nothing wrong with that. But until we put it into practice, we don't know if it works or doesn't, right? And so my mentality was, okay, so the things that I'm learning about this and the thinking that I'm doing, there's a challenge for me. And I did this to myself. Nobody challenged me. And I said, okay, so I'm learning this. So now it's time for me to practice this. So when I went and put the lens on and began to practice it, I saw that there were different outcomes, especially with individuals feeling as though there was a genuineness, because I was bringing it, but it was a bit more now, because I was not just recognizing a human being in front of me, but the culture that's beyond that behind that, and the interest in wanting to truly, genuinely learn about them, that someone can feel. We're humans, so we can feel each other when we're just kind of like checking a box, or actually they're intentionally learning. And beginning to basically have that conversation. But a majority of it would be listening sessions to continue to learn and to develop, and then offering back that reflective listening. So that way, if one, they know that I'm paying attention, but two, how could we work on the strengths that they already have to be pulled out without limits? Because if we don't include their cultural background, then we're putting limits. We're assuming. And unfortunately, that's been the practice for so long that I assume this is what you need. And so I'm going to give you this because you're telling me this. And so without looking through your lens, looking through mine, this is what you need. And it, and that was wrong. But when you intensely invite that individual, empower them, right, to be able to do things, well, guess what? It also came out with facilitation, going into the room and being open and teachable as you're teaching. So, one of the things I always open up is I'm here to learn as well as you are. I may bring out things, but I'm also here to listen to what you have. And so that's how it developed and kind of went into facilitation. It was a motivation the moment that it was kicked into me to say, hey, until I practice this, I will not have the fullness of this and I won't understand it all the way.
Thank you, Roger. Any add-ons, Lisa, that you wanted to share?
So I think if I understand your question right, you're asking how we came from a kind of our personal perspective to the professional piece of it.
Yeah. To kind of help refine that a little bit, it really is coming from the question of like, how did you go from this was an experience that I had, from a lived experience standpoint, to now being able to, like, as Roger mentioned, like, how much does this affect me from a personal level, just what I've went through, and then now sort of moving beyond that to get to a place of, okay, now I'm more taking on the learning side of it and more taking on now the facilitation side of it, while keeping in mind like that trauma perhaps can still be there.
Yeah, for sure. So I think for me, I didn't recognize myself as a former foster youth. I really didn't even call myself that until I was probably into my 40s. And part of it is because I worked for almost 30 years with families that were part of the foster care system. And so all the experiences that they experienced were far more traumatic, if you will, than I felt that mine was on paper. So what I have done is just like Wanjiru said in the beginning is it's just being in a constant learning state and thinking that we know ourselves. I know myself pretty well. Like, I mean, I think if you told me something about myself, I probably wouldn't ever be surprised at anything, right? Some stuff I'm working on and some stuff, yeah, you just have to deal with it, right? So I think that for me, one of the things that I've really learned from being part of the academy and particularly the CRA is just the lens of just being in constant learning. I'm learning about myself in every different situation. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a friend. And so for me, I feel like it's therapy. I mean, certainly just learning about myself and but then also being in a place where I feel comfortable with areas that really need to shift and move and change, and thinking about things that, from my perspective, that may not be somebody else's perspective, right? Roger mentioned it and I mention it a lot in the training spaces is, look, because you're Hispanic, because you're African American, because you're Asian, because you're whatever it is that you share with somebody else, doesn't mean that your experience is the same. And so for me, I feel like what I'm doing is I am just learning about myself. And sometimes, and a lot of times, that learning is in those training spaces because there's opinions and there's thoughts and there's lived experiences, right? There's some trauma that you see in those spaces that's just right there on the surface. It's just right there. And there's also some where people have worked through stuff, they understand what it is. And so I'm learning also from the learners because they're sharing a lot of those experiences and where their journey was and where their journey is and where they hope that their journey will, continue to go. So for me, that's what I'm doing is I'm learning from them as much as they are I don't know, feel like they're learning from me. I'm facilitating those conversations for everybody, the learners as well as myself.
Yeah, there's a lot of meaning in that, especially from the standpoint of like, I know at the academy we sort of steer away from using as much the word like trainer or instructor. It's really about facilitating. You as a facilitator, you're coming in from the standpoint of like, I'm not the expert here. I'm a person that have my own experiences. I have a person who has gone through my own things and has my own culture, and I create a sort of a welcoming and belonging space for others to also fill that in as well. And so like there really is I don't know, like a lively dynamic that comes into play when it comes to, facilitation space like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right in that one of the great things about changing it from facilitator, and I've been a trainer for so many years, so I'm getting used to facilitator, the word facilitator. But I think you're right in that it's such a great opportunity for us to all just be equal. And I say that a lot in training. I say that a lot in those spaces. Like, look, I realize you see me as your trainer. I realize you're calling me your trainer, but I'm not an expert. I may have a little bit more experience in social work, but your life has given you experience just as much as mine. And so it does really help to put that perspective out there. I think it really helps people to kind of feel like, okay, what you have to say is just as important as what I have to say. I happen to just be the one person up here in front, but this is really open for everybody to share everything that you have, so that we all it's an each one teach one, right? Just throw it all up there and let us all pick out what we need and what we understand and what we don't understand, and hopefully what you don't understand you'll ask other people and begin to have an understanding. And that's how we then work with not just the whole person, but the whole family, and really in turn, then the whole community.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit more. Oh no, please, Wanjiru.
Sorry, if I can just add to what Lisa was saying, and that transition in the classroom and the experience in the classroom is we're really modeling for the learners what they can do with families and communities. So really normalizing the conversations. You may say something that somebody else may not agree with. That's actually perfect. Let's have a conversation about that. Let me understand your viewpoint. You hear my viewpoint. We don't have to agree, but the whole point is being able to understand and hear each other. And that's a responsive part, right? And then also being able to self-reflect. If I'm being impacted by what somebody's saying, let me think about that. Why am I being impacted by what Roger is saying? You know what I mean? Why is that impacting me? What has that got to do with my culture or my being? And how do I express that without anger? And instead being able to have that conversation with Roger, right? Because again, it's just that modeling part of it, so that when I'm at my workspace or with a family where we're not going to be agreeing, or something is happening that we're not on the same page, take the step back, self-reflect, and then re-engage from a different lens so that we can actually hear each other. And that's the important part as well. And it's growth. It takes growth. I just wanted to add that, we started the academies back in 2016, very different to where we're at today. All our facilitators, including Roger and Lisa, yeah, including myself, when you first go into that space, it's different, right? We're asking folks to be themselves and to be personal. That's a stretch. It doesn't happen naturally. So both what Lisa and Roger are talking about is key, that continuing to build that skill, continuing to put yourself out there, continuing to relax and hear, and more importantly, learn, put yourself in that learner position. That's where the growth comes. So all our facilitators, including myself as a manager, have grown over the years and become more comfortable to have conversations and creating space for others to do so. And that's the lifelong piece.
Thank you, Wanjiru. Let's dive into a little bit more of some examples and stories. So let's start with you, Roger. Like, how do you begin to model culturally responsive practice when you're navigating conversations that may bring up some discomfort within yourself or with others?
And one of the things that comes to mind is something that I began practicing and saw the impact. And that was on any of the trainings that I do when we hit the part on bias, right? Biases. I mean, when we're talking about looking at our own biases and the different approaches we have, I know some of our trainings have that where it asks up front. And so one of the things that I do, I take it upon myself because I've become comfortable with sharing this is I make sure that I share out my bias. So when I'm in a class and I know that it can become uncomfortable, speaking about biases and so on. And so what I do is I put myself out there as an example to say, look, we all have biases. And so let me share my story. Let me share my circumstance that showed where bias interfered with my practice. So that way it's not, anything to where it's feeling like we're pointing outward. And so I've done it many times, and even most recent where, we talk about this whole piece of working with fathers and child welfare, for example, there's a piece there where it talks about, a father figure, talks about, looking at ourselves and the experiences we had, and it brings out the whole piece on the bias. And so what I end up sharing is my story on my first case on what I had a pet peeve on, which was sexual abuse. And it was a gentleman stepfather with stepdaughter. And so for me, bells and whistles, it went through. And so I went on to share the whole story all the way to the very end on the big lesson that I learned, thinking, oh, you're a father with lived experience, who's navigated the system and has been labeled, maybe not in that way, but you were labeled. And then you turn around and you label someone else before getting to know them. That was a lesson, but the biggest one was the response of the individual that shared, if you wouldn't have been the only one that was there to support me, I don't think I would have made it. And so I found that when we're comfortable on sharing what we're working on and what we've come across and how we've accepted it and how we've developed and become that initial person to say, I'm not pointing anyone else, I'm pointing at myself, and I'm letting myself become vulnerable before you on this whole culture responsiveness. You realize that with bias, we all have them, and here is something to start with. And I've seen it every time where then comes the comfort, then comes the admission. You know what? I really thought about this, and this is what's come out. I realize now looking at this, and it's almost like not so much that they're barely figuring it out, but they found a place to be able to say, you know what? If this individual who is hosting this is willing to put themselves out there, then why shouldn't I and have this difficult conversation? And so that's one of the things that I practice even to this day, whenever I'm talking about, especially with bias, in whatever level it is, because we know bias, it plays a role in every which way. And so for me, that really works, that I'm not just, just sharing out, but I'm giving a piece of myself, of the things that I'm struggling with, and it brings that comfort level. And, race will come in at times, right? We've had, gender come in at times. We've had diverse things come in where they've come to that place where they're like, you know what? And sometimes they'll say, well, this is the first time I'm really seeing this. So I know a guard has been left, right? A guard has been let down for someone to be able to see themselves because they're comfortable enough. There's somebody else who is giving this facilitation, is opening up and being open to a conversation. So that's what I would share.
Thank you. What about you, Lisa?
So along the same lines, I think, as Roger, I love the tough conversations. It took me a minute to get there and to be able to kind of to facilitate those and really disarm folks. I what I love is the opportunity to really see where everyone's at. And I'm a facilitator that pays attention to every single person in the learning space. So I'm watching facial expressions, who's talking, who's not, who talks too much, where the fear is. I am spending my first like 30 minutes, an hour or so just seeing where everybody is as best I can individually, right? And then I move from there, because I think that me coming in with humility and look at, this is who I am. I'm standing up here. You're going to call me the trainer. You're going to think that I'm an expert on this stuff. And yeah, there's a lot of it that I do know, but there's way more that y'all know that I do not. And so I want to know what that is. So I'm going to model in the beginning. This is who I am. These are the difficulties. These are the difficulties growing up. These are the difficulties today. One of the things that I often say in a training space when there is several African American women, and I say, look, you're going to walk into homes in neighborhoods that you've never been in, with people who you have had maybe negative, with a culture that you may have had some negative interactions with. You feel a certain way, right? All your biases are just sticking straight up. And what are you going to do with that? And so what I say is, because of how I was brought up, one of the difficulties that I have is feeling accepted by other Black women. If I'm speaking, whatever I'm doing, I am 100% looking for that acceptance. And so when you shared a little bit about yourself in the very beginning, you feel the tension in the room just go down a bit. And you can see it in people's faces. You can see it in people's body language. So I think for me, I want to model like, look, this is where I am now. Please don't think that I'm up here as the trainer, right? As the facilitator of this, right? Of this space. Please don't think that I am not nervous or anxious or, right? In these spaces, that I don't have just as much to learn in this learning space as you do. And I just put that out there in the beginning. And I feel like pretty much 100% of the time, it's there. And then we are all ready for the possibility of some difficult conversations.
I can add to that, Charlie, as well. Just thinking about that, honestly, with me and my perspective, I do go in there accepting the responsibility, because I call it responsibility for myself as a facilitator. And the reason why is because, one, self-value. An individual who comes in as a peer, parent partner, youth partner, all these, roles. I've lived through sitting down and knowing that I was not looked at as equal to everybody on that table. So I understand that role, and I did not disrespect anyone. I did not, everyone is entitled to their opinion. And I realized that I answer to who I am, and I do not answer to who I am not. And so for me, the role of facilitator was an honor to get, because in the times that I became a trainer, for myself at least, it wasn't something that lived experience was really being brought into. And so as time began, and I was able to do that. And what I mean by lived experience, I'm not saying Lisa as yourself, those who were parent partners and youth partners, those who came in strictly as lived experience. Even within our county, we had this box. And you go into this box and you watch everything move back and forth. You watch promotions, you watch transitions and all that, but you don't move. You sit there. You see everyone with their union that you belong to go up, but you don't move. You see all of these things. So we became a culture within ourselves. And we had to fight to be able to sit at tables, which we shouldn't. But we did. And so for me going into this, it was, you know what, I am a facilitator, but I'm not the individual that knows everything. Right. And I think, for me, from my perspective, going in there, I do own that, because for me, it was something that I had to unfortunately fight for and earn. Right. And so now we're looking at change happening within San Diego with the groups that we've been in, as well as, with Davis. Davis is really big on it. But in the beginning, it wasn't always like that. I was introduced to the Parent Partner Advisory Committee with Davis, and then came, simulation for us as parent partners, youth partners, and then came the opportunity. So thank you, for doing that. at the same time, it was something that we had to go in there and make ourselves known in such a way, respectfully and humbly, but we had to swallow a lot of different things, right? And so for me, it's like being able to do that. On top of that, though, having this learned skill of being able to go into a room and sit down and meet individuals where they're at and have these hard conversations where I sit back and listen and and I validate the feelings, right? But we don't always validate what's coming out. Because sometimes people don't know what they don't know, what they share, how it comes out and how offensive it can be, right? But at the same time, if we want change, for myself at least, I have to meet them where they're at. I have to begin to understand, so that way we can look at what middle ground we have to move forward and to develop, but also at the same time teach them, hey, this is how things are supposed to be with someone like myself. And I have to say it that way because a lot of times there are many who forget. And I've sat in offices and been around other individuals, other social workers who are just talking, right, about the parents. And I was a parent that was there. So, they're not to say there's differences and we're not working at it, but those are kind of the things that I look at in the lens. No disrespect to anyone across the board. Anyone who comes in, I don't practice what was done to me. If anything, I learn from it and develop so that way no one else has to feel that, no matter who they are. And so I think for me, practicing this culture responsive is exactly that, because there's also culture in agencies, there's culture in community, there's culture, everywhere, if you really look at it. And how is it that we can be responsive to that? We have to be open to learn all the way across, to listen, to have those difficult conversations, to learn how to agree to disagree. But there has to be an example, someone who's willing to say, you know what, I hear you and I respect that. At the same time, this is another thing to think about. And so that's how I go.
Thank you. All right, we've had some wonderful conversations today. I first off want to thank our guests for being on here, for being able to share their perspectives and experiences. And I'd want to at least finish our conversation today with asking from you all, like, what's the final takeaway statement that you'd like to share with our listeners on just the importance of being culture responsiveness? And let me start off with Lisa.
That's a loaded question. Be a constant learner. What you think you know, cool. But what don't you know? And seek that. And even what you think you know, still look for opportunities to still learn from other people like you, people not like you. Yeah, I think just being a constant learner and not feeling like you're an expert on any one subject or any one culture or any one group of individuals and communities and people, and just come in with some, I don't know if ignorance is the right word, but come in with a little bit of unknowing, and then accept some new knows.
Thank you. Roger?
Can you repeat the question again? I apologize.
Yeah, what's the final takeaway that you have on just the importance of being culture responsive?
So I think the final takeaway that I have is, it's not too far off from Lisa. I agree, being open and teachable and remain that way, I think is the best approach. And of course, coming in with an open ear as well as an open heart, right? Because the best way of learning is by listening. And if we never give the other individual or individuals the opportunity to speak, they will never get to know who they truly, genuinely are in whatever aspect it is. And I think for me, that's a continual thing. And I do come out with something each time that I facilitate a training, or when I'm sitting down with someone, really getting to know them and genuinely listening to them. Sometimes they ask me, is everything okay? And it's not that, I'm being quiet because, I just don't want to say nothing, but it's because of the respect I'm trying to give. So that way I can get to know the individual that's across from me. So that's what I would do. Thank you.
Thank you. Wanjiru, do you have any final takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. Mine is self-reflection. always self-reflect. Even though you're having a really good conversation with somebody and you're on the same page, always self-reflect as to why that is, right? Like why, so that you're not moving into this space of a think or somewhere, like you're all thinking on the same page, right? Hanging out with people who think like you, because you also want to be able to expand your network and interaction. So self self-reflection for me is key, whether the conversation is going really well. And if it's not going well, always think back to what my part is, right? And then how I can go back and re-engage. That for me is key. I find myself doing that more often, and it's a good exercise. It's painful sometimes when you look at yourself, but however, it's much needed. Much needed.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you so much to our guests and thank you to our listeners for staying tuned to this episode. We're looking forward to have you tune into future episodes of the Academy I3 podcast. We'll see you soon.